Lake George in depth. The Westbrook Conservation Initiative. The transformation of the Gaslight Village site. The protection of the Westbrook headwaters at Berry Pond. The recovery of the wetlands. Preservation of the waters of Lake George. Welcome to Lake George in Depth, a program series presented by the Lake George Watershed Coalition, dedicated to stewardship of the Queen of American Lakes. In each of our monthly journals, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the challenges and the accomplishments of important lake initiatives, the experiences and connections, recreation and conservation of Lake George. The Lake George Watershed Coalition, formerly known as the Lake George Watershed Conference, began in 2001 with the recognition that all partners, the members of the coalition, would bring about a focused effort to accomplish a common goal of protecting the water quality and abundant resources of the lake. The mission of the coalition is to provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, facilitate the coordination of acts and resources of member communities and institutions, and to increase education and awareness for the general public on the challenges affecting the lake's water quality, with efforts collectively focused on protection, preservation, and stewardship of the lake's natural resources. The New York State Secretary of State serves as chair of the coalition. Through the effort of the members, the coalition has developed a plan to address the challenges of the lake. This plan has identified a continuous list and a hierarchy of beneficial improvements, best management practices, and opportunities for strengthening interagency and intermunicipal partnerships, supporting regional stakeholders to advance present and future priority actions. Dave Wick is the manager of the Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District.
And over the last 5 years, a lot of groups have come together to form what's called now the Westbrook Conservation Initiative, which is a massive stormwater protection project for Lake George and the Westbrook watershed.
The Westbrook Conservation Initiative captures both the spirit and the intent of the coalition's mission through cooperation and the focused energies and resources of their member institutions and the public at large, realizing the protection of a critical resource while at the same time preserving and reestablishing the natural beauty of the lake. Over the next half hour, we'll examine the history and challenges of advancing this important initiative over the last decade. Clearly a long time in the making, the various project sponsors and participants along the way have remained focused and dedicated to realizing its completion as perhaps one of the single most important environmental initiatives in the Lake George watershed. Westbrook is a major tributary entering the southernmost shore of Lake George. The lake's superior water quality depends on tributaries supplying clean water to the lake, as 50% of the water flowing into Lake George is from its streams and tributaries. This once undeveloped wetland area in the heart of Lake George has a storied past, a virtual microcosm of America's cultural experience itself. Peter Bauer is the executive director for the Fund for Lake George.
What we're standing on now is the north parcel of the Gaslight Village. This is an area that historically was part of a massive wetland system. Westbrook used to flow through on a meandering course through this area. It was your typical Adirondack alder wetland swamp.
For thousands of years, the area of the Westbrook wetland at the southern end of Lake George has been the entranceway to the lake and part of the northeastern transportation corridor. The area where Westbrook joins the lake was described by the English in the 1750s as a great swamp. Situated between Fort William Henry and Fort George at the head of Lake George, the site is at the crux of a historic battleground in which control of the North American continent was fought by the French, English, and Native Americans, where defining acts of the French and Indian and Revolutionary Wars occurred. A wooden plank road was later established on what had been the military road between the Westbrook site at Lake George and the Hudson River at Fort Edward. A train terminus was then added as rail became the main mode of overland transportation, replaced later by a system of automobile routes. Although Lake George became a beloved destination for its beauty and purity, each improvement of transportation to the southern end of Lake George, along with subsequent industries such as the railroad, hotels, and sawmill, eroded and contaminated the Westbrook wetlands, its two streams, and the lake.
During the late 19th century, it was filled in. This area became a filled-in railroad depot. The depot was down there, and this was a railroad yard for stockpiling coal, stockpiling all sorts of materials, stockpiling just railroad cars and other materials.
By the mid-1950s, the environmentally critical wetlands had been completely covered over with fill, and Westbrook was straightened and confined within a road corridor, with the result being the creation of a conduit for pollutants to enter the lake. In 1959, the vaudeville theme park Gaslight Village was built by amusement park entrepreneur Charlie Wood on Westbrook Road. In this 1890s-style plaza, Wood incorporated modern amusement park fare with a car museum, antique rides, and a full-stage opera house. The park later became known as Lake George Action Park and was closed in the 1990s. With the needs of the community and the lake in mind, Lake George Village pursued the purchase of the property for public use. Appropriate redevelopment of the former amusement park became a significant concern to residents and leaders since its commercial use was discontinued. For more than a decade, community leaders planned and debated the land's best use. Numerous public and private possibilities were explored, and the property was rezoned for mixed-use development.
I can remember you gave me a call and said, what do you think we can do with that property? Oh, you're a neighbor and I'm a neighbor. And so then we started thinking, and it wasn't just a couple months, it was several years.
Two long-term Lake George business owners, Bill Dow of the Lake George Steamboat Company and Bob Flack of the Fort William Henry Corporation, were influential in envisioning new vitality for the site.
Remember I gave you a little drawing. San Antonio, the Riverwalk, something like that. I thought, oh, wouldn't this be attractive? And
that's where it started. But then I would say a saga began. People wanted to do this, and they wanted to build convention centers, and they wanted to do that. But anyway, for whatever reason, the ability of environmental groups, conservative government groups, the state of New York, all working together towards creating an environmental park for the beginning, the entryway to Lake George is a magnificent thing.
In my opinion, it's probably the most important initiative that's ever been undertaken in the Lake George Basin.
The plan continued to formulate as a site designed to remediate lake health issues and update Lake George's urban landscape, providing an accessible green space to host a web of interconnecting public and private activities.
It sat there vacant and decaying. As the entrance to the Adirondack Park, the entrance to Lake George Village, the entrance to our beautiful Lake George, it was the first image that people saw when they got off of the exits to visit our resort community. It was a bad scar on the entire area to have that land set there and just decay in front of our eyes.
The buildings have now been knocked down as part of the Westbrook Conservation Initiative. The three environmental groups, the local governments purchased this property back in 2008. And now we are at a critical point because we've been able to knock down the buildings. We're clearing the site. All of the asphalt will be removed. The fences will be removed. And we'll really have a blank canvas in which to create an environmental park on this site, which is truly exciting. On the south parcel of the property, we've already started rough grading for the creation of a stormwater treatment system.
Stormwater runoff from development areas has been identified as a primary cause of water decline in Lake George. Studies documenting stormwater runoff problems within the Westbrook watershed started as early as the 1970s, noted by the rapid growth of sediment deltas that have occurred in the end of the lake. Sediment loads from the Westbrook watershed to Lake George were estimated to total 270 tons annually. Deltas have a measurable negative impact on drinking water and fish spawning areas. Dredging the accumulated sediment from the nearshore area took place every few years to maintain navigability. Specifically, Westbrook contributes approximately 50% of the total annual tributary runoff entering the south end of Lake George. The Lake George waterkeeper, Chris Nowitzki.
Well, a treatment train is the various processes that stormwater will go through and the various methods and design measures that are used and techniques to take out the pollutants, to take out the sediments, and there are very specific design elements that have been incorporated into this park. First of all, you initially come into the park and you want to really have what we call pre-treatment, which is to slow down the energy of the water so that sediments can drop out. Sediments can really impact the rest of the treatment process. So those are the easiest things to remove, and we want to drop that out through the entrance into the park through a riprap channel, take down the energy of the water. As the water slows down, the sediments will drop out. It enters into what they call a forebay pool or a deep pool, where water enters and velocity and energy is slowed down, and as that slows down, that restricts the ability of water to carry particulates, to carry sediment, and therefore they will drop out in this deep pool. That's sized to be deeper so that it'll have volume and capacity to take those sediments. Those sediments are removed two reasons, really. It's important to get them out so they don't clog the rest of the system downstream and restrict the treatment ability downstream. Also, the sediments carry a lot of the other pollutants which are adhered to them. Basically, they are attracted chemically. The nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen are adhered to that chemically and will be carried along. They can also carry along some of the oils and greases, so those can settle out also. Once you get through that initial pre-treatment, we get into more of what the thought of the whole park was, which was the wetland construction. So that second phase, the constructed wetlands, we again have the deeper pool areas as this channel flows through, so that allows areas for water to settle out. It allows area for water to congregate and be here permanently, to allow there to be a higher water table, to allow the wetland plants to grow. As we get a storm event and the water elevation rises, we have channels that are designed so that the water will have a greater contact with the ground surface. And then as we come down to the last part of the process, we basically break out into two, what they call polishing wetlands. One of those will be a deep water wetland, which again will slow the water down, allow some more pollutants and sediment to drop out. There will be, again, more vegetative plantings along the side, so that again there can be more polishing done. The second aspect, there's going to be a separation into what is called a subsurface wetland, which is seen right over here. The subsurface wetland is very important because this is a totally different concept. This water will not travel on the surface, but it will enter the wetland and then get drained and flow through the subsurface, through gravel. It will have interaction, not as much interaction with the soils because it'll be filled with gravel, but it will have a lot of interaction with the plant roots that are specifically designed for this subsurface wetland. It'll interact with the roots and be uptaken by the biological activities. Another great aspect of the subsurface wetlands is it will really control the temperature a lot better. That's our main concern. As we go through this treatment train, we've had a lot of slowing down the water is good to remove the pollutants, but it also has a impact because as you slow the water down, it gives it a greater tendency to increase in temperature, and we don't want to put water that is thermally impacted back into Westbrook for the aquatic habitats for fisheries. So what we want to do, and what the subsurface wetland will do, will keep the water subsurface, cool down, which is very important, so it'll be at a lower temperature going back into the stream, which I think is an aspect a lot of people don't realize. The other great aspect about it, the subsurface wetland, through studies that were done at University of New Hampshire, who worked with us on this design, show that these are as effective in the summer and non-freezing months as they are in the winter months. So as they go through these last two polishing events, they will then get put back together and discharged jointly out into Westbrook. And the way I always like to say is you want to make water work. We don't want to make it easy to go through. As engineers, we were always trained, we want to capture water, put it in pipes, and put it right to the lake. And we, as engineers, did a good job, but we did a bad job for the lake.
While New York State Department of Transportation has modified winter road maintenance practices to minimize use of sand, and the community of Lake George has taken steps to minimize salt, all roadway systems and connecting parking lots serve as a source of contaminants, oils, greases, and heavy metals that make their way into the lake with stormwater runoff. Recognizing the accelerating damage occurring to Westbrook and the lake because of development, public and private agencies have in the last decade initiated and completed stormwater systems to help mitigate contributing problems.
Because one of the things that DOT, the administrators of the highway, said is it's not just our stormwater, it's also coming from the private properties. And every private property landowner, every business owner that we talked to said, yes, you can do the property, you can modify our property to get that stormwater in the ground. And so we're able to take a lot of that private stormwater and get it out of this public system, get it infiltrated and treated back in the ground. And that sets the stage for this much larger public project down here.
Working together in an unprecedented cooperation, members of the Lake George Watershed Coalition, an organization representing 25 public and private groups chaired by New York Secretary of State, established the goals specific to the site by recreating an engineered wetland and by reestablishing a community green space that would provide public assembly opportunities, interpretive signage, nature trails, an education center, and other recreational experiences will be established along with site-appropriate landscaping and water-permeable parking areas. Lisa Nagel is the principal at Elon Planning and Design.
What's unique or interesting about this park is that it is an environmental park, and we're working to define what that is with the public. But parks are also economic engines for communities, and this park can be a signature not only for the village of Lake George, but also Warren County, the Adirondack Park, the state, and even the nation.
One of the really exciting things about this is to be able to work with the rest of the team and think about how does this story get expressed, not in words or in pictures, but in the whole dynamic of the park.
Completing the vision for remediation of Westbrook was the purchase of the 1,400-acre Berry Pond tract in 2008 by the partnering Lake George Land Conservancy for $2.7 million. The Berry Pond Preserve includes the headwaters of Westbrook, Berry Pond, a pristine wetlands and open water wilderness that is home to an active beaver community and great blue heron rookery. Nancy Williams is the executive director of the Lake George Land Conservancy.
Well, I see the streams being protected in perpetuity. I see wonderful recreational opportunities here, educational opportunities for wildlife studies, and there's a wonderful boggy pond down below that people will be able to enjoy.
There's always a need for balance in any society, and the Conservancy is committed to maintaining a sense of balance. We work very closely with the communities to see that we protect what needs to be protected.
In 2001, the coalition adopted Lake George Plan for the Future, in which some 42 specific recommended initiatives were identified. Westbrook was identified as being the largest single contributor of sediments and corresponding pollutants to the south basin of the lake. The completion of the Westbrook Conservation Initiative will mitigate a significant source of pollutants from entering the lake, educate the public, and promote stewardship of our natural resources, and will go far to meeting the stated objectives of protection, preservation, and participation set forth in a primary initiative by the Lake George Watershed Coalition.
This is something that no one else has been able to do across the state. This project is being held up not only across the state but across the nation as a model for others to follow, and that's how I think this thing will be remembered.
I think this lake should be protected like the jewel that it is. My hope is that everyone who uses this lake and knows of this lake also understands we all have a responsibility to protect it.
This journey is going to continue. We've got to continue to appreciate what each other has done and accomplished.
This has been Lake George In Depth, a program series presented by the Lake George Watershed Coalition dedicated to stewardship of the Queen of American Lakes.